Welcome everybody to this presentation of how to run WinPST. In this presentation, I'll cover all the information that is needed to have a successful WinPST run, and also I will demonstrate how to export that information so that it can be used in developing the current Conservation Practice Standard implementation requirement for Conservation Practice Standard 595. Let's begin at the top left-hand corner here, where we can see that there are 4 tabs, and we'll go left to right. So making sure that you have the correct soils database loaded, and if you don't, make sure that you do get that properly located first before you begin WinPST. WinPST runs off of one soils database, but in that one database I've included 4 separate surveys worth of data. In this example, you can do this also. In this case, I'm going to select Yakima County, so the Yakima soils get loaded. As a user, selecting soils is relatively simple. What you need to do is you just find your soil, you highlight the row, and then you need to verify that the soil properties that came in through Surgo are actually correct for your site. There are 5 different parameters that you need to verify. Slope. And so if you need to know what this is you can just hover over it, and it tells you in this case, check this box if the slope is greater than 15%. If that's the case, that box should be checked for your field. If it isn't, deselect it. Cracks. If there are cracks, large cracks or macropores going at least 24 inches deep in your soil, then select that box for your soil, and if not, deselect it. And then the last one is there high water table less than 24 inches from the surface of the soil? And if there is, then you would check this box. And if there isn't, you would not. 2 other parameters, user supplied organic matter. This is the value from a soil test, and I would strongly recommend not modifying this value unless you have multiple soil tests that show either an increasing or decreasing trend that's different than what is in the Surgo data. And then the other value that's important is this user depth. So this is the user supplied depth that represents the depth of the surface horizon. If you have evidence that it is not this value from more than just one boring, then you might consider changing this value, but more often than not, we will tend to use this Surgo value. Once you've verified the 5 parameters are correct for your site, and you've selected your soil, you can click Add, and you'll see that that particular soil is now in the queue down here in the soils queue. And you will select all the different soils that are in your field in a similar manner. And once you have all the soils in your field in the queue, you can now switch to pesticides. There are 2 tabs for pesticides. There's an AI tab, AI standing for active ingredients. You will use this typically if you can't find a product name in the products tab, but you know what the active ingredient is. So for example, if your client is using a product with glyphosate in it, but you can't find the product name in the product tab, you can come here to the active ingredient tab and type in, as you start typing in glyphosate in this box here on this side, you'll see that the pesticides sort themselves, and so you see glyphosate is available with different product codes. Depending on which type of glyphosate is being applied, you can actually pick the individual glyphosate material. But for the most part, we'll be using the Products tab. And in this case, again, in the search box here, you can type in all the products that are being used by your client. Let's start with Roundup. That's the easiest one that most people use. So you can see I began with Round, and it's returning everything that all the pesticides that start with Round. And so here's Roundup. Scroll down till we find Roundup Ultra. And before we select this pesticide, there's a few things that you need to ensure that you select before you put it in the queue. And that is there's 3 parameters: application area, the amount of the field that's receiving it; the application method, how the material is being applied; and the application rate, how much is being applied. Now, first question, application area. Roundup, in this case, most commonly Roundup is applied as a burn down, except for in Roundup Ready crops where it could be potentially spot sprayed. But most commonly Roundup is applied as a burn down, and so that means the entire field is receiving it, the application, and so we will leave this as broadcast. If this were atrazine or some other chemical that's applied in a band over the seed rows, that might be a banded application, and a spot application might be for a particular herbicide or a particular insecticide that's only being applied to less than 10% of the field. That's when you would select spot. So the next thing is application method. For this Roundup case, we have 3 choices: surface applied, soil incorporated, and foliar. If we go up here and hover our mouse, it tells us what those are. So if most of the Roundup is hitting the dirt, then we would select surface applied. If most of the Roundup is hitting leaves, then we would select foliar application. And if this was another pesticide that needed to be watered in or is worked in with tillage, then we would select the soil incorporated. Now in this case, we're doing a burn down maybe of a weedy field, so most of the material is going to be hitting the weed mat, and so we'll call this foliar. And then the last one that we deal with is the application rate. We have 3 choices: standard, low, and ultra low. You need to do some math here. Basically are converting the application rate of the product into application rate of the active ingredient. And so we know that a couple of quarts per acre with the active ingredient here being 41%, we'll see that that's definitely more than 1/4 of a pound per acre. And so in this case, for this particular scenario, for Roundup, it's going to be a standard rate. And so once we've tweaked everything, we ensure that the row is highlighted, and then we go up to add, and now you can see that I've added my glyphosate. And you do this for all your pesticides that your client is using. Typically what you do is you can run one WinPST run for each crop in the rotation so that you don't have too big of a report. So if you're doing wheat and then peas, you do a WinPST run for the wheat year and then a WinPST run for the pea years. I'm going to move over to the scenario tab, and here is just an example of creating scenarios. So this is a wheat scenario that I saved from earlier, and so I had saved some soils and some chemicals that are associated with growing wheat. And in this case, I could just highlight that, bring all of those soils and chemicals in. And so now I have all the chemicals that are used for wheat. Notice that these 2 soils, Bristol and Werman, are in Kittitas County. And I had originally picked soils from a different county. So if I wanted to keep those soils and get rid of the ones that I just added, the easy thing to do here is to highlight the soils that I don't want and then just click delete. Do that again, click delete. And another little trick is if you want to get rid of all your soils and all your pesticides, you hover over delete and you right click, and now you can either clear all the soils, clear all the pesticides, or clear both. To save a scenario, all you have to do is, based on what's in here, click to go to save scenario, and now you can give it a name. And now I have a new wheat scenario right here that's been saved. There you go. So once you have all that information, now we go to the Interactions tab. Now everything in the WinPST report that is going to be there is up here in this table, and it's a little bit hard to follow, and so that's why we like to run the report. One last thing before we run the report, though, is we need to select whether or not these pesticides are being applied when there's a probability of rainfall or irrigation that causes runoff or deep percolation soon after the application of the pesticide. So if you're in an area where this can occur, then you would click high, and if not, you would click low. If some pesticides are applied during a potentially wet, rainy period and others are not, you can have a WinPST run for the low rainfall pesticides and then another WinPST run for the high rainfall pesticides. Once all of that is selected, that's when you click the Reports button at the bottom of your screen. And what we want is the interaction report. We don't particularly care to see the pesticides and soils reports separately. We actually act on the interaction report. And so what I would recommend you do is type in the cooperator's name, track number, field number, or field numbers that this applies to, and then you can generate a PDF. Once that PDF is generated, it can be saved in the Customer Service Toolkit folder for your client. You can also just click Preview to see what it would look like. I certainly recommend creating that PDF and saving it, but it's going to look pretty much like this. And so in this case, we had 2 soils and several pesticides, and you can see that some pesticides produce very low hazards. You see some question marks for chemicals that we don't have toxicity information for. And you can see that anything that's intermediate, high, or extra high is going to be red for you. And these are the hazards that indicate that you need to do something about these. So what do we do about those? Well, we use the 595 implementation requirement to fill out exactly what to do about those. But to do that, we're going to need to feed the data from WinPST into that Excel spreadsheet. And so what we want is we want to select this export, click Excel, and create the export. Now we have the opportunity here to give this a name so that we can have each run with a different name. So I'll rename this. And I click Export. And here we go. It's telling me that WinPST has created the Washington example and put it in the C WinPST 3.1/exports folder. And we can search for that and verify. And here we have the Washington example file that I just created. If you open it, it's a lot of data and it's not very helpful. So we will not actually open this, but we'll actually import the data directly into the Excel spreadsheet that actually will help us develop the 595 implementation requirement.